Hi, and it's Kevin Wright again with this week's property finance tip. So what are we going to talk about this week? Well, we're going to be talking about renting to benefit tenants or any other type of non-standard tenant. So it could be vulnerable adults or something like that, and exactly how you set up the lending for that. So this week we're going to look at benefit tenants or other types of non-standard tenants and how lenders look at lending to those people and the different ways that you can set up these contracts. So essentially the question to begin with is, who exactly is the tenant and what contract should you use? If you're going to use an AST, then the benefit tenant or the tenant itself has to be the signatory to that agreement. So if you're running an HMO for 5 or 6 tenants of a particular variety, then you need 5 or 6 individual ASTs. You know, the issue with benefit tenants, as far as lenders are concerned, is that that benefit is now, it didn't used to be, but until about 10 years ago it used to be paid direct to the landlord. But for about the last 10 years, since about 2008 or 9 really, the benefit system has worked differently in that the council pays the tenant directly, and it's the tenant's responsibility to pay the landlord. Now, with the best will in the world, they're not always the best with terms to their finances. So it means there's an increased chance or potential that actually the tenant will get into arrears. You know, and it could be something, you know, really sort of dramatic, like, you know, their car's packed up and they need to use the rent money for to get their car back on the road so they can get to work, so they can earn. So, you know, there are, you know, sometimes extenuating circumstances, but putting the tenant between the council paying the landlord puts an extra factor of risk in there. And mortgage lenders, rightly or wrongly, you know, have a tendency to not be so keen on lending in that situation, because they understand that the landlord has potentially a greater chance of not receiving all of the rent all of the time, on time. You know, if you're renting to any vulnerable type of tenant or benefit tenant or any other type of thing, you're going to have a fewer choice of lenders. There's been a lot of comment and, you know, moves even by the government to say, well, you know, that's discriminatory, and, you know, there's a case for that. So it could be over a period of, you know, months or years that changes to a degree, and lenders are pressured not to distinguish between one type of tenant or another. Now, there is another little workaround, well, 2 workarounds really. One is that if you can demonstrate to the council that the tenant isn't really capable of managing their money, and you get their agreement that that you can be paid direct. That's one way around, of course, but you know, the council then has to make a judgment on the inability of the tenant to manage their own finances. Now, another way that's proved quite useful is to use credit unions. The council are quite happy to pay a credit union all of the benefit of a particular person or family. The credit union would then, you know, create, I mean, some of them call them like jam jars. You know, if you go back 50, 60 years when everyone got paid weekly and got paid in cash, you know, they would typically set up a series of jam jars. So there'd be, you know, a few bob in the gas jam jar, a few bob in the phone jam jar, you know, a few bob in the electric jam jar, and of course a jam jar for the rent. So, you know, some credit unions set up what they call these jam jar accounts, so they actually help the tenant manage their money. When the benefit comes in, they put an agreed amount into each of these micro accounts, and then it helps the tenant manage their money. But it also ring fences the rent, which is passed then directly to you as a landlord. So that's a way that if people feel that they want to rent to benefit tenants, and there's no reason why you shouldn't really, then that can be a way that works better for all parties concerned. The council is discharging their responsibility, the credit union is providing a very valuable function to the tenant, and it makes you as a landlord, it increases your probability of getting your rent on time every time. There's another angle completely on this, so let's look at this now. It's possible that actually, rather than renting directly to the tenant on an AST, you rent to the authority. So it's the authority that takes on the lease of the property, and therefore you can't use an AST, because an AST has to be signed by the person or persons that are living in the property. Clearly the council is not going to be living in the property, they're effectively going to be subletting. And this can be, a whole variety of people. And it doesn't have to be councils either. It can be, I don't know, charities, even central government with asylum seekers and that type of thing. Now this throws a completely different light on it. And typically these are 3 and 5 year leases. And that breaches, in two ways, this breaches normal buy-to-let lender or even HMO lender terms and conditions, in that one of their clauses in their contract is that the rental period must not exceed 12 months. First of all, if it's a 3 or 5 year contract, clearly that exceeds 12 months. But secondly, if you've got if it's not the tenant that's in there that you've got the rental agreement with, that's also a breach as well. So how do you set up the lending for these type of contracts? Well, it's commercial. So these are commercial lenders. So really, it's a commercial lease. 3 to 5 years, and it's a fully repairing lease. Now, you don't always get market rent on this, but here's the thing to consider. You've got no voids, because it's not your responsibility to tenant it. The authority that's leased the property from you pays you whether they fill it or whether they don't. So you've got no voids. You've also got no agency fees. Now that can, typically they're what, 10%? So that's 10% of the rent. That's an expense gone. Now, if you're running this as an HMO, you've got no bills, and that's one of the often bones of contention with HMO landlords, is how do they control the tenants using the utilities, and how do they prevent that being an escalating cost. So with this type of contract, no bills. That's taken care of by either the tenants or the council or other organisation. And you've got no maintenance, certainly no minor maintenance anyway. Plugs need changing or certain things like that, then you haven't got that expense either. Major expense like a new roof or something like that, yes, you'd still have that expense. Now typically, all those costs can eat up certainly 20, 25, maybe even 30% of the rental income you get. So it's no longer quite so important that you get market rent for this, because even if you get 70 to 80% of market rent, you're actually not going to be much out of pocket at all. And it's one that there's this phrase passive income, and we all everyone talks about property's passive income. Well, it tends not to be quite so passive depending on the strategy you're running. But this, outsourcing the contract to an organisation is about as passive as you can get, because you literally have no involvement at all other than major repair works. A feature of commercial leases is that it's a fully repairing lease. In other words, unlike normal tenant-landlord contracts, with commercial, it's the tenant's responsibility, not the landlord's responsibility, to upkeep the property. Fundamental difference. Fully repairing lease means at the end of the 3 or 5 years, then it's the property's returned to you, and it should be in the same condition that you handed over to. So there's another advantage of this. So who lends on this? Well, commercial lenders. So commercial lenders have to lend on this. So that's a different way of looking at non-standard tenants. So you can either rent to the tenant directly, or you can rent to the organisation that is overseeing that tenant. So hope you found that useful. Go and check out some of the other videos on the site. You see lots of other information on there. Got any comments? Pop them on there and I'll pick them up and answer them. If you like this, click the like box, and hey, if you haven't subscribed yet, click that subscribe button, because I'll be releasing one of these videos every week. That's it for this week. Hope you've enjoyed that. Hope you found it useful. Take good care of yourselves. See you next week.